In the 16 years since it's been running, Wildlife on One has been given many awards. Here's a film that gained its cameraman, Alistair McEwen, and its director, Pelham Aldrich Blake, 3 awards. It features not some rare creature from some exotic country, but common little animals that can be found skittering on the surface of ponds and puddles in the length and breadth of this country. This fly has less than a minute to live. For most small creatures, the surface of water is a fatal trap, but a few have mastered its peculiar problems. For them, this fragile interface is home. Look closer at the familiar surface of our ponds and rivers. On this gossamer-thin film, you will find a whole new world, miniature and unsuspected. Communities of tiny hunters, grazers and scavengers, walking not on land, but on water. The water measurer, a half-inch long hunter of the weedy water margins. Pond skaters. In this, the largest of our 8 or so British species, the male rides on the female's back, locked in an embrace which may last for weeks, hence its country name, the double insect. And walking inverted below the surface, a water boatman, shadow boxing with its own reflection. Split between 2 worlds, the whirligig beetle sending patterned wavelets across the surface film. But what forms this thin film? Water molecules at the surface are subject to unequal forces. They're attracted more strongly to their fellows beside and below than they are to the air above. So the surface tries to contract, and this surface tension forms an elastic layer, strong enough to bear the weight of a small insect without breaking. Look at these pond skaters. Their bodies are held clear of the water, only their feet touch the surface. And the feet are covered with tiny water-repellent hairs. So they just dent the surface film rather than breaking it. The body, too, has a waxy water-repellent covering, so that if it does touch the surface, the pond skater isn't trapped. This caddisfly is even lighter, but it isn't waterproof. It's broken the surface film, and now it's spread-eagled by the pull of the surface tension, held down by the same force that keeps the pond skater up. The waves generated by its struggle alert a pond skater. They have vibration detectors in their feet, and the order in which these are stimulated tells them which direction the ripples are coming from. Once at close quarters, they can use their eyes as well. Those strange shadows are caused by light being deflected from its path as it passes through the waves and dimples on the water surface. To begin with, the prey is approached with caution. It could be dangerous. But once it's identified as harmless, it's seized with the front legs and carried off. It's quite common for feeding pond skaters to anchor themselves by a foot to a convenient twig or stone. The pond skaters are hunters and scavengers of open water. Some even live on streams and rivers. The still margins of ponds are home for one of the surface grazers, tiny primitive insects called springtails. They may look like a herd of elephants, but they're little bigger than a pinhead. Most of the time, their tail is folded round and hooked under the body. But if it's released, it slaps down and hurls the springtail into the air, hence the name. They come in assorted shapes and colours. Like the pond skaters, their bodies are water repellent, and so too are all but the ends of their legs. Their feet, though, are designed to pierce the surface film, so they can get a grip on the water without sinking too deep. They feed on the thin layer of detritus and microorganisms at the water surface. Flowers and unfurling leaves are familiar signs of spring at the water's edge. But close to the surface, there are stranger unfoldings. A dragonfly nymph has crawled up out of the water and shed its skin for the last time. Now the adult waits for its wings to harden before starting its new life above the water. Damselflies of many kinds and colours take to the air in search of a mate, though here they're courting within a wing beat of the water surface. But these creatures of the air have to return to water to deposit their eggs. When mating is finished, they fly off in tandem to lay. There are several ways of doing this. Some dragonflies scatter their eggs as they fly over the water or dip them loose through the surface to sink to the bottom. This damselfly is laying with greater precision. Although she looks delicate, she's strong enough to thrust her tail through the surface film to place her eggs on a reed stem just below. Others lay deeper and in a remarkable way. The pond skater's courtship has a more intimate connection with the surface. Indeed, some species use it as a sounding board to transmit their messages of love. The males vibrate the water surface to attract females. This species is a little less subtle. Only after the male has mounted is the surface used as a means of communication. The female's vigorous vibrations show the male that she is receptive, and he in turn will dip his middle legs into the water in front of her and shake the surface. Their tails touch, and sperm is passed from male to female. The male will remain on the female after mating. By doing so, he perhaps ensures that no other male will mate with her before the eggs are laid. Sometimes eggs are deposited in the splash zone on the rocks, projecting from the water. But if the level were to fall, they would be left high and dry, and more often they're laid beneath the surface. To get there, the female has to break through the surface film, and it's quite a struggle. Her waxy body repels the water, and the surface tension is continually pulling her back up. It's hard for us to appreciate the strength of surface tension, but for an insect the size of a pond skater, it's a very real force. When finally she does break through, a silvery film of air clings to her body. This allows her to breathe while she's underwater. But it also makes her very buoyant, so she has to hold tight to the rocks while seeking a suitable spot to lay. Each female lays about 40 eggs in batches of 5 to 20 at a time, neatly cemented onto the rocks. When she's finished laying, she lets go and floats back up to the surface, buoyed up by the air trapped around her body. After about 20 days, depending on temperature, the eggs begin to hatch. The newly hatched pond skaters break through to the surface. At this stage, they're a leggy, short-tailed version of the adult. They will molt 5 more times while growing to full size. Until then, they keep out of the adult's way. They run the risk of being eaten if they don't. Like the adults, they're air breathers. That's no problem if you live above the surface. Underwater, it's different. Some aquatic insects have developed gills to extract oxygen dissolved in the water, but others, such as these thread-like mosquito larvae, are still dependent on the air above. To reach it, they have to break the surface film, no easy task for so small a creature. They solve the problem by having microscopic oily flaps at the tip of their breathing tube. These are water repellent, so when they touch the surface, they break through, and the surface tension pulls them out like the petals of a flower. So firmly does this anchor them to the surface that they have to give a convulsive jerk to break free. Once they're below the surface, the flaps close over the end of the breathing tube to prevent water from entering. The water beetle larva is another creature that's dependent on air from above the water. It's much bigger and stronger than the mosquito larva, but even so it uses a similar technique to help it break the surface film. Its tail has a fringe of water-repellent hairs. Here it is again seen from above. Air is taken in through the 2 holes at the tip of the tail. The water boatman, too, comes to the surface to replenish its air supply, a gleaming envelope of gas trapped in minute hair-covered grooves on its body. And it, too, has a water-repellent hairy fringe to its tail. By such subtle beauties of structure, these creatures harness the strength of surface tension and turn it to their advantage. To us, the threat of a summer shower is a mere passing irritant, but to these minute creatures the effects can be catastrophic. The once hospitable water surface suffers a dramatic change of nature. At the first sign of rain, the pond skaters make for the shore. They anchor themselves to a rock to ride out the storm or leave the water altogether, for the open water is now a place of unbelievable fury. The pond skaters have survived the rain, and they soon clear the surface of casualties like the unfortunate lacewing fly. Much of their food comes to them in this way. Both dead and living insects are washed in off the bank. They don't chew their prey, but inject saliva and suck out its juices through their piercing mouthparts. Here the male probes for a weak spot in the lacewing's cuticle. Feeding pond skaters often raise their victim up from the surface. This prevents the struggling prey from creating waves that would attract others to share the meal. For the pond skater is not the only creature sensitive to the ripples of a struggling insect. The surface film is a sounding board for others too. The swamp spider, Britain's largest spider. Instead of a web, it uses the water surface as a snare. It lives in small pools in fen and heathland, often lurking at the water's edge, but with at least one of its 8 feet on the water to pick up vibrations. Insects are the bulk of its prey, but a fully grown swamp spider will take small fish. Like the pond skaters, its feet are water repellent, so it too can walk on the surface. Even so, these water skating spiders may spin a silken lifeline to link them to the shore. The use of surface waves reaches its greatest sophistication in the whirligig beetles. Not only do they detect the ripples made by struggling prey, but they use the wavelets created by their own movements as a kind of aquatic echolocation. They pick up the returning waves reflected from objects in their path, and so avoid bumping into them. But it must be tricky to decide which wave is yours in a swarm like this, and they do make mistakes. The rippling surface conceals yet further dangers, for vibrations can be picked up underwater too. A struggling hoverfly attracts a water boatman. It detects the ripples at a distance with sensors in its feet and tail. Water boatmen are robust predators. Small creatures they simply drag under, but with a larger prey like this, they climb on top and swamp it. Then they stab it and inject a powerful poison. They can even give a man quite a painful bite. Although they're fully at home underwater, they're strong flyers too. If they exhaust the food supply in one body of water, they can break out through the surface and move to another. Few ponds or cattle troughs are without their population of water boatmen. They owe their ability to colonize new places to the power of flight. As the waters cool, the life at the surface prepares for winter. Pond skaters leave the water to hibernate in nooks and crevices ashore. Other creatures will pass the cold months in the depths below, perhaps overwintering as eggs or larvae. Life and colour drain away. Soon this gossamer habitat will be deserted. As winter comes, thin fingers of ice seal the water surface. The surface becomes hard, unyielding, inhospitable. Our water walkers await the year's turning. Others will walk the water now.
Next week, ambush at Masai Mara gets close to Kenya's marsh lions as they lay in wait for migrating wildebeest.